Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are tuned to the Nighttime Podcast, focused on the fringe of Canada.
Listeners of Nighttime, let's consider this episode a sort of public service. I say that because I feel this episode in particular has the power to ease the minds of many people out there who feel they've witnessed a fleet of alien invaders in the skies above Canada. Let me explain myself. I'm someone who frequents many UFO and paranormal themed discussion spaces. Most notably, I frequent the UFOs Above Canada Facebook group. In that group, Canadians from coast to coast share and discuss their thoughts and experiences with the strange lights and unexplained phenomena seen in our skies. But as mysterious and anomalous as many of the photos and the stories shared there are, there is one particular thread that is very played out and very explainable. The story usually manifests itself in one of two ways. It's either a photo showing a series of aerial lights aligned in a straight line, or a witness account from someone who saw a series of objects flying one after the other in a sort of linear formation. Well, if you've seen this type of photo or hear this type of story, before you rush to your emergency bomb shelter, consider this. Elon Musk, the billionaire inventor and entrepreneur, may very well be behind it. In fact, Elon Musk may be partly responsible for the recent rise in Canadian UFO reports. And tonight, we're going to hear why. In this episode of Nighttime, Canadian UFO researcher and related data analyst Chris Rutkowski will tell us what Elon Musk has to do with the rise in Canadian UFO reports. Chris Rutkowski, how are you doing in this bizarre world of UFO reports and government secrecy?
Well, not bad. I mean, considering the government's got us locked down, it's the best we can do. We can look upward into the sky, right?
Yeah, that's one good thing about the lockdown is from my backyard I can see almost the whole sky. So to engage in the UFO phenomenon and whatever the hell's going on, the government can't stop me from doing that, COVID or not. Although I'm getting my vaccination shot today. You've already gotten yours, right?
I got the first one, yeah.
Any symptoms or side effects or weird stuff going on?
Zero, nothing. But it was a little sore where they jabbed me, but that's usual from getting jabbed. So
yeah, every flu shot I've ever gotten in my life, it's like the next day I can hardly use that arm.
Really?
So I'm expecting the same thing. I must have like a small allergy or something to whatever's in it, but I always get that. So that's what I'm counting on. But just to be safe, I'm going to wear a tinfoil hat and maybe like various religious symbols on shirts and stuff.
Yeah. And instead of a mask, a whole paper bag,
Oh, absolutely. But all joking aside, I come to you today with a weird paranormal problem, I guess, is what I'll call it. So you remember the Facebook group UFOs Above Canada that I'm one of the moderators on. It seems really in the last month, I've been getting inundated with UFO reports of things being seen above Canada that all sound very similar. So I think either we're under attack or something else is going on. So what I want to do tonight is read you a few of the reports that I got in the last 2 weeks, but from different people, different parts of the country, different days, different times, but they all sound very similar. So I want to run these by you and let's see if we can solve this mystery tonight.
Okay, because that's what we're doing. We're not debunking. If you're able to explain a UFO sighting, it's not debunking.
Yeah.
It's actually doing your job as a UFO investigator. There's a distinction there.
There's a fine line, it seems, like explanation versus debunk. Yeah, there needs to be kind of maybe a separate episode. We'll dig into that.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be an often misunderstood topic as well.
Sure.
So let me give you a few sightings here. So the first one I'm going to read you. This was, again, all of these were sent through the UFOs Above Canada Facebook group. This first one was from Penticton. Is that BC? Penticton?
Penticton, it's a beautiful place. Beautiful place.
So on May 15th, it was beautiful and strange, especially at 10:41 p.m. The witness saw a very slow pass across the sky along cylinder objects made up of a row of gray lights, is how they described it. It made zero sound. The weather conditions were a clear sky. And when the report asks them, how did you lose sight of the object? They basically describe it as flying from the right of their house, past their house, and they couldn't see it as it slowly disappeared behind the mountains. So it seemed like a long string of lights. Before we get into it, let's get some more. The next one, actually the same night, May 15th. This is from New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, 9:59 p.m., so about an hour before the last one we talked about. Also, about 7 minutes long, same as the last sighting. What the witness describes is multiple white objects made up of pinpoints of light, not making a sound, passing in a uniform line across the sky. So, very well could be the same mothership or fleet of destroyers. But that wasn't the only time they made themselves known. McTier, Ontario, a witness who was looking northeast in the sky, overlooking Stewart Lake, I don't know the area, May 12th, same night, from roughly 10:50 p.m. till 11:50 p.m. So within that 1 hour period, for 10 to 13 minutes, here's what they experienced. For over 10 minutes, a lineup of white lights that looked like stars moved in a singular pathway from what appeared to be a version of the Big Dipper in the sky. The small white lights kept moving in a perfect diagonal line, perfectly spaced apart, until the one at the far right would disappear into oblivion. At first, this looked like an optical illusion, so I asked my mother to watch what I saw, and she was shocked and memorized to see the exact same thing. For 10 minutes, I carefully studied the movement and the pattern. From the base of the Dipper, the bottom star would appear, then it would follow in perfect motion and sequence as the other lineup of stars, behind the other lineup of stars, and clearly move across the sky and disappear. It took approximately 30 to 60 seconds for the bottom star to make its way to the top before disappearing. They never blinked or changed colors. So a bit more descriptive version, I think, of a similar sighting. So far, I don't want you to spill the beans yet, but you got a theory yet?
Well, I won't even spill the beans, but you had a sighting out west, a sighting in the east, and a sighting in Ontario. I'll see you those cases, and I'll give you one from Saskatchewan.
Okay.
May 15th, also May 15th, Leask, Saskatchewan. Clear skies, no sound. This fellow wrote me directly, I'd expect to see familiar satellites gently rolling overhead when I stepped outside for a smoke. Instead, above me was a line or string of lights attached or traveling together like you'd expect Santa would be cruising with all his sleigh of reindeer. See? I like that. I like that. I mean, that's beautifully descriptive. Absolutely beautifully descriptive.
You know what? With all like the COVID shutdowns and stuff, maybe Santa has his workshop shut down and he's just flying. Spent May zipping around over Canada.
Over Canada, right? The coast.
Another one from Melville, Saskatchewan. This is May 6th. At night, my friend Doug Stevenson and I were in the hot tub when this happened, and we sat there in disbelief at what we were seeing. There was a large chain of lights, equal distance apart, moving simultaneously across the sky. The first chain was about 20 lights. Then 2 or 3 minutes later, another chain with over 100 lights went across the sky from the southwest to the northeast, like a giant train in the sky. You got it? Before we get into it, you got any more?
That's all I have to share right now. Yeah.
Okay. So in hearing reports from across the country of a string of lights in the sky, is this surprising you, or is this something you've seen a lot of in the last year or two?
Yeah, over the past year or so, we've had many reports like this. People seeing what's been described as a string of pearls, a long train of lights, and there's actually a name for it. It's called a constellation of satellites.
And
And it's what's interesting is that the dates are what really gives this away, I think.
Hmm.
And for the more recent ones, the 15th of May is pretty key because at that time, that date was the latest launch of Starlink. Good old Elon is sending stuff up there, left, right, and center, and they're sending up these Starlink satellites. And when you send up 50 or 60 at a time, they can spread out into a long string of lights. That sounds what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think anyone who frequents kind of like UFO discussion groups or Facebook groups, they've probably seen photos that it's obviously these Starlink launches where it's again a straight line, just a series of dots, and often the reports are nights that are described as a clear sky, which is exactly when you would see the launch effectively. So what is the Starlink satellite? And actually, before I ask you what it is and what the purpose of this is, do you think this may have some part to play in the increase in UFO reports in the last year or so?
Well, there's absolutely no question that they played a role in the large increase in UFO reports in 2020 versus 2019. During 2020, there were a lot of these launches every month or so, and so that would generate so many UFO reports that they really described many cases that we received over the last year. But I'll have a little asterisk that we'll talk about after we talk about this other stuff.
So what is the Starlink satellite constellation, and what does that have to do with Elon Musk?
Well, Elon had this idea of providing internet service to remote areas of the world. And the idea was that, antennas only go so far, and microwave towers and all that sort of stuff. So why not put a bunch of satellites that will remain in position over, the areas of the country that need to get internet service, and just beam the internet service up and down that way. And, these satellites, the trouble with this is if you just put up one satellite, obviously, if it passes around or, it's too far from some places, it's not going to do any good. But if you put up, let's say 10,000 satellites, eventually there'll be enough to cover the entire globe and everybody will have a gig internet service. And you know what? It's actually happening. With a long solar panel and an antenna panel attached to it, and they're all connected. They all fly in fairly uniform until they start spreading out. And they've actually been launching 50 or 60 of these, usually 60 at a time. So I forget where we might be well over 1,000 now. I have to keep track. May 15th was an anomaly. They only put up about 50, but that's because in addition to the Starlink, they put up some scientific payloads as well. But the rest of the time, they're all these individual satellites. And what happens is you put them all out, and then as they slowly drift apart, because they're all following the same orbit, they seem to follow a long line. And because they're reflecting the sun's light, you can see each individual satellite for a while until they spread out far enough, and then you can't make them out as a group anymore, and then you just see the individual ones flying from time to time.
So when this train of light passes over, they're not lit, there's not electricity or lights on. We're just seeing the light reflecting off of them.
Absolutely, we're just seeing the light reflecting off of them, and that's why sometimes we've had reports of them being brilliantly lit, and then they'll suddenly disappear. But that's because they're going into Earth's shadow. So they actually are doing really well in terms of reflecting the sun's light. Nothing internal on them at all.
Mm-hmm. And when people see this train of them, are they seeing the ones that are already up in the sky, or are they watching these new ones kind of being launched one after the other? Is it like a string of them that is just passing around the globe that we're seeing? Or
yeah, when they're not actually attached to one another, they're just released at the same time, and because they're in the same orbit, it takes them a while before variations and speed eventually disperse the individual satellites into a longer chain, and then eventually you can't see them as a chain anymore. But it does take a few days for them to do this. So for a few days after each launch, they will look like strings of pearls in the sky.
Or Santa and his reindeer.
Or Santa, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's bizarre. Like Elon Musk has his hands in so many weird projects. Like he was on the Joe Rogan podcast once talking about like these super tunnels he's building. Then he has like the Tesla cars, and now
And he was on Saturday Night Live. Come on,
of course. And now we have his satellite constellation, which aims to provide internet to underserviced areas, which is a good thing to have.
yeah. And I actually know people who have it already.
Oh, really?
In fact, Northern Ontario, there's a few First Nations areas. And I know in some parts of Manitoba, actually, a friend of mine in Northern Manitoba, not even in Northern Manitoba, like Central Manitoba, you can actually purchase the kit, which is around $1,000. And then you pay for the monthly fee. But the speed and uninterrupted service is phenomenal. Like you wouldn't notice if you were streaming a Hollywood movie any problem with downtime or anything like that. Like it's fast.
Yeah,
it's really, really fast.
And for
some of the remote communities that have never had reliable internet service, they've had to rely on phone lines or whatever. This is a godsend, because literally everybody in the town or in the First Nations can receive super fast internet service. So it's showing its worth already, and and this is just with, like I say, we're probably still just around 1,000, maybe even under 1,000 now, but eventually the plan is to have thousands, tens of thousands of these up there. And it will really bring very, very fast communication to everywhere on the globe.
Which, yeah, it couldn't be more important than now. Like with everyone working from home and everything being shut down, I couldn't imagine doing the stuff I do without, high-speed internet. And it's,
So I will predict that within a year, you're probably going to be on it, because it's that fast and it's going to be that economical.
Well, so I guess mystery solved with those reports. Should I email those people back and send them a link to this?
Sure, I think that's very worthwhile. However, there's that asterisk I mentioned.
Yeah, tell me that.
And you had said, are these Starlink satellites responsible for the increase in UFO reports last year? And yes, they are. But we're still seeing Starlink satellites going up. There's more up there now in 2021 than there were in 2020. But the number of UFO reports has plummeted.
It has.
In fact, I was looking. I was actually doing the calculations for another reason, and just as a comparison. For the National UFO Reporting Center, is Peter Davenport in the States. It's for all around the world. In 2020, for the first quarter of 2020, so the first 3 months, there were where am I here? 2,066 UFO reports. That's the first quarter of 2020. For 2021. 771.
Oh.
That's a drop of 63%. If you look at MUFON, same period, first quarter, 1,569 reports. For the first quarter of 2021, 1,188. That's a drop of 24%, not as radical as Newfork, but MUFON had a 24% drop. And if you only look at MUFON Canada, we had 83 reports in the first quarter, and only 51 in the first quarter of 2021. So a drop of around 20%.
Wow.
So even though we're saying that Starlink is partly responsible for the increase in UFO reports in 2020, and some people are saying, well, it's because of the pandemic and more people are looking outside because they're not going, into large venues and spending all night there rather than spending it in their backyards. Well, the pandemic's still on. We're still under lockdown. In some cases, we're even under stronger lockdown now. And the number of UFO reports has radically decreased.
That is interesting.
It's not just Starlink. It's not just the lockdown. There's something else at play. So that's something to chew on.
Cue the X-Files theme song as you say that.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Saturday Night Live. Did you watch Elon Musk on it?
I did. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was pretty funny. It was a pretty funny episode.
You know he's married to a Canadian, right?
And his mother is Canadian too, if I understand it.
I didn't know about that, but I don't know if he's married, but they have a child together. She's a singer from, I think, from Quebec. She uses the name Grimes. They have a child together. She's a Canadian.
Really? Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah, I know he brought his mother on the show in the cold open, and as I understand it, she is also Canadian.
Very cool. Well,
I look at the Canadian connection with all this stuff.
Yeah, so I do too. So I think that this conversation that we just had, I'm going to release as an episode of my show, more as a public service announcement. I want people to know that if you see a string of lights in the sky, you're probably not about to be abducted. Not to say it's not going to happen. It may be an unrelated string of lights, but I think people maybe are. I could see, if you didn't know what the Starlink was and didn't frequent these groups, I could see how you would react to seeing this in the sky. Because based on the photos and some of the videos I saw, it is a fascinating, like a fantastic looking scene to see a string of bright lights passing in unison over the sky. I wouldn't know what it was.
Absolutely. And the fact that people are noticing them is very promising, because they're spending time looking up rather than looking at their phones, and rather than watching the boob tube or something like that. There's stuff up there that's really interesting to see.
We're recording this on Sunday, the 16th of May, which is an interesting day for UFOs, because tonight the American, I guess it's a news show, 60 Minutes, is featuring UFO reports as their the focus of the episode. I don't watch 60 Minutes. I know you do. What would they normally be covering on that show?
Well, in the past, they do probably one political story, one science story, and one sports story in general. So, for example, they I think last week they did a story on cybersecurity, and they had a story on a famous athlete, and then they did something else. So, I mean, they do a lot, but it's hard-hitting news generally. And I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, that they'll ask some hard questions of some of the leaders and thought leaders in the UFO scene right now. Tonight. I don't have high hopes, but you never know.
I'll be tuning in. All right, Chris. Well, this has been great. I appreciate you at least likely solving the riddle of those few reports we had. So thanks again for sharing your expertise over here.
Absolutely. And the next launch of Starlink is May the 26th.
Well, if you see a series of lights in the sky, traveling one after the other, consider the Starlink satellite constellation before panicking. But then again, what's to stop some dark force from simply hanging out at the back of the line and entering our atmosphere undetected? Yikes. And with that unsettling thought, we'll conclude this episode of Nighttime. But first, I'm going to give thanks. Chris Rutkowski, thanks again for sharing your knowledge with us. A big shout out to Monty Data for contributing the music to this episode. It's a piece called Noir Tokyo. And lastly, but most significantly, a massive thank you to everyone who listens to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, Nighttime would be as pointless as it would be impossible. But with that said, keeping this show alive is and has always been an uphill battle. So if you want to keep alien forces away from this show, please consider subscribing to the premium feed. Not only does it keep the show possible, it'll give you more of each topic than you're going to find here on the free feed. So for about the price of a cup of coffee, help us out by subscribing to the premium feed at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And with that said, let me thank the newest supporters of the show. Frankie, Renee, and Robin, thank you for your generous support. If anyone out there has any story ideas, simply wants to give feedback on the show, reach me at nighttimepodcast.com/contact or find me on social media. I use Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I'm often live on the Nighttime Podcast YouTube channel. You can find links to all that stuff in the episode description. So that's it. Until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte. Copyright Jordan Bonaparte.